The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for another SLCan presentation. The presentation today is called A Low Carbon Narrative for a National Research Campus of Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Presenting today from HDR is Don Chong and Dave Wong. Short bios on Don Chong. After creating his own award-winning architectural studios, Donald became HDR Toronto's design principal and launched the research-based Future Studio. Donald has been widely recognized for his broadly scoped, well-detailed architectural works and for his research initiatives, efforts strongly regarded for their inventiveness and investment in placemaking. His deepening and critically engaging portfolio has drawn interest internationally for Donald to speak, educate, and teach abroad. And also presenting is Dave Wong with HDR. A short bio for Dave is Dave Wong is Principal, Education Science Technology with HDR. Dave is a leader in integrated project delivery and currently delivering Canada's largest IPD at Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Dave is an architect with over 24 years of institutional project leadership and construction experience. His portfolio demonstrates a commitment to design excellence and passion for social and environmental responsibility. So we're going to hand things over to Dave and Don right now. I just ask that if you have any questions, please type them into the question box and we'll get to them after the presentation is completed. And this presentation will also be available on YouTube. All right, Dave, take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. I'm going to get to our slides here right now. So I'll just say thanks very much for having us at SLCan's webinar. We're excited about this series and the information that the knowledge sharing that does take place here. One of the things that we wanted to do here today is to tell you about the revitalization of CNL. So CNL is Canada's premier nuclear research campus. Canadian Nuclear Labs is in Chalk River, Ontario. Maybe many of you do know that. It's about a 2-hour drive north of Ottawa on the beautiful Ottawa River. You can see the photo of the campus here in this first slide here. It's the renewal of a 60-year-old site that continues to be driven by some of its core values of heritage and innovation. So underpinning this most recent campus renewal, this $500 million investment is a commitment to low carbon development and really is something that's been driving the implementation of this renewal. One of the unique aspects of this renewal is the adoption of mass timber construction, and Don will really get into some of the details regarding that. So what we intend to share with you today is a few things. So the first thing is the background and history of the organization. Number two, we're going to talk a little bit about innovation in project delivery through IPD or integrated project delivery. Number three, I'll give a very high-level overview of the suite of new buildings that we've been designing and implementing. And number four, Don will get into a deeper dive into the mass timber components as it relates to both construction and the carbon narrative. So a little bit about CNL. I think many of you may know Canadian Nuclear Labs. It's really known as a major research infrastructure. But really one of the things that we like to think about this is really it's a community. There's several thousand people. It's a community of researchers, including Nobel laureates, a technical team and support staff. You know, along the top, these images here are probably ones that some of you may be familiar with, some of the kind of interesting work that they do there, hot cell nuclear research, but also, again, just emphasizing that it really is a community. The photos along the bottom, you see their fire department, a health center, and you know this total community of support staff that really does support this level of research. A little bit more about CNL. CNL's parent organization is the Federal Corporation Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, or AECL. Historically, AECL had two areas of key focus. The first one was the design and implementation of the very successful and globally known CANDU nuclear reactors. The second is nuclear research, including medical applications and other energy solutions. AECL has a number of sites across Canada today, and it continues to enable nuclear scientific innovation and advancement. It delivers its mandate through kind of a long-term contract with CNL for management and operations of its sites. Most notably, it's the premier research site is in Chalk River, which is the subject of kind of our discussion today. Chalk River's research site is Canada's largest research complex and really the birthplace of the Canadian nuclear industry. The site itself is really big. It's a 9,000-acre site with over 70 major buildings on it. By 2018, Chalk River produced up to 1/3 of the world's medical isotopes. So since then, having decommissioned its last reactor in 2018, the key focus of the campus renewal has now shifted more directly to a research environment for broad-based industries, from health to safety, emergency preparedness, and other environmental outreach. Through this current campus revitalization, AECL and CNL have renewed their commitment to sustainability and the development of a climate-positive campus. This name you see here, the Clean Energy Demonstration Innovations and Research Park, or CEDAR Park, is really used now to denote this commitment in their kind of next iteration of this campus. So with this background, I'll tell you a little bit about HDR's involvement. So HDR was commissioned about 4 years ago to do a comprehensive overall site master plan. Really, it was about kind of the rethinking of how does this campus function in our kind of modern day here. Following the master plan, we continued to design and implement 4 facilities that you can see here in this image here, the kind of range. Here's the first one being a main gatehouse or logistics building. The second being a business and innovations building, really kind of a mixed use office type building that also had a number of other functions, some support buildings, and then the kind of one major research building that we'll be talking about as well. Here's another image. Here you see 3 out of the 4 new buildings in white. In this initial stage of the master plan, there was a change of attitude towards their workplace. And I think this was kind of a fundamental to the development of these buildings and the master plan. CNL leaders and staff were accustomed to referring to this workplace as the site. You know, and during the master plan process, really this language shifted to kind of referring to it as the campus. This shift in language really signified kind of a fundamental shift in attitude, where it was now focused around people and the community of researchers, really about attracting the best and brightest. It's the shift in attitude which allowed for the development of this kind of central green space that you see in this diagram, in this drawing, where the new facilities now frame it. This is really kind of central to the transformation. This attitude is kind of central to the transformation of CNL Chalk River's campus. Just these 3 buildings, the top left is the support and maintenance building. The business hub is the one in the middle, and the lower right is the Advanced Nuclear Research Center. So a little bit more about the buildings that we've been implementing here, the 4. All of them have a mass timber component, which is again part of our the drive to low carbon. The upper left is the Business and Innovations Hub. It's a 6-story mass timber structure. It's a building which houses 400 employees with support and amenity spaces. So it's an office space. It has a data center. There's central records and library, a health and wellness center, also kind of a major conferencing area with an auditorium. Really, this is kind of a central meeting place and services the entire campus. To the upper right is the logistics building, about a 50,000 square foot mass timber building as well. The new logistics building serves a number of functions, but primarily it's the main welcome center on the entire campus and security checkpoint. It also handles all of the shipping and receiving and inventory stores for the entire campus. To the lower left is support building. Its primary purpose is to support maintenance and manufacturing for a whole host of kind of other functionalities on site. And then finally, to the lower right is the ANMRC, the Advanced Nuclear Materials Research Center. This is where the hot cell research takes place. There's a number of hot cells in this building, A and B class nuclear labs, including vibration sensitive labs. It also has multi-purpose and shared meeting spaces kind of within it. So that's a high level overview. I'm going to switch gears a little bit just to touch on integrated project delivery. This procurement and delivery model, we believe, was key to the success of the project and how it's gotten to where it is, keeping the low carbon narrative at front of mind and in the mass timber components realized through this delivery method. So what is IPD? Really, IPD is a new delivery model. You may be familiar, you're probably likely very familiar with the other delivery models, design, bid, build, construction management, etc. Really, IPD, or integrated project delivery, is just the next evolution in procurement, design, and delivery. How is IPD different? There's many differences, but the fundamental difference is in its contract. In these kind of two models that you see here, design, bid, build, CM, or design, build, there's often multiple agreements between parties, and these multiple agreements often have opaque relationships between them. These opaque relationships create competing incentives, and they're not always driving for the best benefit of the project. I think the fundamental difference is that IPD, there's a single contract where all of these parties sign. So there's a poly-party agreement. The poly-party agreement, its main goal is to align interests and incentives, including financial incentives. A little bit more about IPD. So IPD is collaborative, right? So it's openness and transparency is something that's fundamental. Openness and transparency, we mean including financial transparency between all of the teams. This does matter because it aligns the incentives. Fundamentally, one of the things that there's pain and gain sharing. So the success of the project is the greatest imperative. It is, if the project wins, we all win. If the project loses, we all lose. So that is kind of fundamental to how this is, how this type of delivery model works. Here, this diagram, you see the circle. Inside the circle is the risk-reward circle. Just a little bit about how this comes together. Often you see here kind of that the parties that are often involved in the risk-reward pool is the owner, the contractor, the designer, architect. There's often major consultants kind of within this, so structural, mechanical, electrical, as well as major trades. Often often M&E and probably kind of a structural consultant. There are members that are outside of this, so they have traditional relationships with the team members. I think, again, there's no set rules for who's in and out of this poly-party agreement, but I think one of the things that we've been using to determine who is part of the team is what type of innovation can this member provide to the project? How do they help in providing cost certainty to the project? And how do they help mitigate risk? So those are often questions that we would be asking for whether a member is worthy of kind of participating in this risk-reward pool. I'm going to move on here. Here you see an image of co-location environment where the owner, architects, engineers, builders, specialty trades, etc., all work hand in hand. You know, in this image here, it's difficult to distinguish the roles. We are all working together to advance the project. Again, alignment of incentives is kind of key here. So why do we work together? Fundamentally, working together like this drives collaboration and knowledge sharing. Now, having seen this image here, what we've been recently asked is, how are we dealing with this in the age of COVID? So I've included this slide here. You know, our project has successfully moved online. 100% of the design activities are now being all handled through kind of a shared BIM model. Here's a typical pre-construction coordination meeting. I think on the right-hand side of the images, you can see the smaller images. You see the groups of folks kind of gathered around a screen going through kind of the final review of the components, making sure that each of the folks understand what their role is. Obviously, this has been moved kind of fairly seamlessly over to Zoom. And because of the shared BIM model, we've been able to continue this activity, even though we're no longer co-located in physically. Another snapshot of our IPD team. You can see the members who are part of the risk reward pool. You can see the range of members here. So certainly the design and engineering team members you see here, HDR, Integral Group, etc. But also the kind of key trades. So you'll see our controls trade, our concrete trade, M&E trade, our mass timber trade, Nordic Structures, and also some other ones that you may not expect, but our furniture supplier, our drywaller. These were included because we believed that they were integral in achieving the schedule and allowed us to they provided input on innovation in the project. So how is this done, and how do we ensure sustainability and low carbon objective continues to kind of be at the forefront of the discussions? We started out very early on to establish what we thought were what we call project values, and one of them is around behavior. So all too often we know behavior becomes barriers to success. So we start by defining our team's expectations. Strong communication is one, respect and trust between all parties, accountabilities, deliver what we commit on is kind of some of the kind of key behaviors that we insisted on that our team members exemplify. Conditions of satisfaction is another measure of project success. The whole team identified some of these items here: design excellence, history and heritage, positive and lasting impact, certainly kind of tying into our carbon narrative, and innovation were all key measures of satisfaction. And then finally, KPIs, key performance indicators and outcomes, certainly budget, schedule are key. Safety is so important to CNL, so that's certainly there. But also other items like quality and pride became kind of key performance indicators. So these became part of our charter and how the project was driven. And so I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn. Dawn's going to give an overview of our carbon approach and our mass timber execution. Okay, Dawn, I'll pass this over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully people could hear me all right. I'm assuming so. And it's Don Chong here. Thanks again to Dave and also to the organizers here for this conversation. I think it's important, as Dave had alluded to, the idea of being transformational. We could say this ostensibly about what we have here with the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, but we also see this as something somewhat generational. And while we might see this in a project across, say, 3 or 4 buildings and structures, we'd like to think as a studio, as an office, as architects, as citizens, that we can make this kind of impact on the go and to be nimble. Even the conversations just that Dave talked to you about, pandemic conversations, I think still continue to push us to see, are we doing things the right way and innovatively. I know some of these pictures had just that you see in front of you had just shown up previously, but just to kind of re-anchor the conversation about the people that are there and the science and the degree to which we want to believe that there is that kind of infrastructure that we could help take CNL into the next century, but also that it has a level of its resilience, that the building as instrument is something that we feel is very strongly, it's appropriate to try to build and to manifest. And I'm going to just see if I could advance this slide directly, and I just clicked over. Maybe, thanks for the patience here as we're just doing this remotely. Okay, I think I got that there. And I think it is good to kind of step back a little bit for this campus. This campus is something that just for the orientation, again, it's just a couple hours north, driving up from Ottawa. We're looking at Quebec here, and it's a wonderful site, and the reminder clearly of the terrain, of the valleys, of the fact that it's remote, but it's still a very, very deep and concentrated area for really amazing thought for over half a century. And this is the kind of thing that there's just the reminders also of what we see as the trees, the forest beyond. And it is an opportunity to say, okay, if this is the Cedar Park, this the Clean Energy Demonstration Innovations Research Park that CNL decided they want to continue to go forward, they felt that this was in keeping with the federal conversation, not just a government idea, but just it is just the nationwide conversation of, are we doing what we can? Is this the opportunity? I think there's enough moments that we've seen for all of us in whatever discipline we're at to see, can we make that kind of difference? And a lot of this takes a little bit of stepping back. So much so that this image, for those of you who don't already remember this, or who haven't forgotten this image, the idea of, oh, I'm sorry if people could just mute there. I'm not sure if I hear background noise, but in any case, I'm sorry. Hey, Dave, can I just make sure, is everyone hearing me okay? I hope that I'm speaking all right. I hear some background noise. I'll keep speaking anyhow.
You sound good. You sound good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. If others could just mute, that would be wonderful. So this image here, that if you don't already remember this, I think what's wonderful is to think about just the back side here. I think it'll show in a moment here, which was a reminder for us of what we were proud of in this country. So much so that we would put this on our currency, that this is the same river. This is the same Ottawa River Valley. Now, in this case, with the perfect sort of metaphor of what is backing this effort. It is the seat of our federal government. That is, obviously Parliament Hill there. And the idea that this country of ours was so proud of the resources that we had kind of reminds you of the beachcombers, if that doesn't date me. But I think the idea that how does this translate to what we have done at a level of being resourceful? And now I think it seems fitting that CNL is along the same geographic regional places, that is trying to see what can we do as a nation that could be similarly, let's say, supported. So I'm just going to advance this here. It's there you go. Oops, I'm going to go back one there. Pardon me, there's a little bit of a slides here that are moving forward a bit quickly, but I think what I'll just do is show the image right here of the biomes, the regions in North America. Something that we'll often do is to step back. Of course, we could see where we are around the Great Lakes, and the sensitivity that we would understand that these things that are the trees that surround us, it does allow us to think again, the kind of Al Gore image that was popularized from the Apollo 11 mission of the Earth. And we know this narrative. It's something that if we haven't already understood, what are we doing to try to make this planet understand itself, not just up to 2030, but beyond. And of course, the kind of common conversation that people have about, what's this kind of sort of future ahead of us, and it seems somewhat drastic, but it's real and it's urgent. And what are we then doing to say, well, listen, it's trees, stupid, is the kind of idea. It's been sitting here kind of waiting for us to say, have you not figured out that we kind of are on this planet together, that there's the perfect sort of organic medium that is ready to try to be available. It's renewable and it sequesters carbon. I mean, how many things could we ask for the kind of perfect sort of medium in which we could do things? Something that we've sort of understood as builders or as architects. Maybe we have an opportunity to rethink what we're doing again. And I think it's see that as this is all surrounding us, the idea of climate crisis, and again, I'll read this statement on the side again, trees are extraordinary beings in every respect. You do not become the primary source of a planet's life by chance. And I think it's kind of good for us, kind of incumbent upon us to say, what can we do to look again at the things that probably isn't so original? It's always been around us. And I think now that we have the ability to have the backing and support and people who are willing to try to do, I mean, they just spoke about this with the framework of IPD. Can we take those risks and understand responsibility, not just in contractual arrangements, but just as again, citizens and players in an environment in which we have so much that we're working with in terms of space or material. These things we would think have a lot of impact. And when you step back and look at this in the larger framework, it helps us to understand and then what we're doing. And this is a trip, because of IPD, we were able to go to northern Quebec, to Chibougamau. The landscape does kind of remind us of just the previous shot. And I think it was maybe because of this opportunity to see firsthand, this is our client, Kelly, who was just so moved by seeing the black spruce trees that were being harvested. We wanted to know how this worked. And we went there in person to see how they were able to take the tips, which you'll see in a moment, of these resources that were otherwise being laid to waste. And Nordique, among other good manufacturers around the continent, we sat them down in IPD framework, and we had to go in, and we wanted to see how their what we call lamella and the grain structure of these amazing pieces could be used. And they figured it out, but how could we still use it? This thing called lamella, those are the actual little pieces there. They run about 1 5/8 by 2 5/8 inches, and they're finger jointed. It's this kind of innovation and understanding of the grains that we needed to know with our engineers who were in that previous slide, that then let us understand the ability to kind of have these laminated structures that I guess was the constituent elements of our projects, whether they were the posts, the beams, the lintels, the main girders. We understood better how the grain structure could work. We wouldn't have been able to do this if we didn't have that transparency, the trust, the openness, the willingness to say, can we do this? Because it's going to have a net impact on the kind of bottom line. The question is, what is the bottom line? Is it just about the project dollars, or could it be other levels of investment and maybe carbon related? So understanding that firsthand gave us a chance to look at the building itself and to see that it's going to be able to evolve relative to the structure and the components within it. And I'm just trying to, pardon me, I appreciate the patience with this, just trying to advance remotely. It might advance a few slides at once.
Don, you can.
Nathan, I may ask
just,
if you could just advance slides.
Sure. Are you good here?
Oh, there you go. There you go. It might, yeah, it might bump ahead if you. Yeah, it seems to be doing all right there. Okay. And so when we were in this location, it was wonderful because we were able to see firsthand the process in which they're doing it with the owners and the builders and the engineers right next to us. And so I'm going to go one more slide, advance there. Coming back to the sites, you can sort of see, oops, it's going forward, but that's all right. The idea of the landscape itself and what it meant to come back. Literally, it was a few days just after seeing the plants. And this was us. We wanted to see how we're doing these components. We were already on our way doing it. And we were still trying to learn other advances for the successive projects. This was for what we call the logistics building that David's mentioned. And right then and there is the 89mm deep slabs that were, quite honestly, even though it was relatively new for some of the people in the region, it was wonderful to see. And people, if they don't already know people like Mike York of the Carpenters Union and others, there's a whole conversation about the trades and the culture and the way people could make this work. And I think this is the other level of clarity that we're seeing with these kinds of, these new sort of mediums in which media, I guess, that we are building. So these are the shots that we took, I think it was the day after, and you could see that a structure like this that SLCan committed to have a structure that could be resilient in use was something we were just excited about, to the point where the federal government saw this going up. They had even nudged CNL to say, hey, listen, would you be interested if this space could be available, just in case, for field hospitals remotely? Because of the pandemic, people weren't sure. And that was a real good sign on our end that we were that had the good bones. We want to believe things like our attention to the structure and the systems in it allowed us to see these buildings as fantastic, like good bones environments that can shift and change. We want to believe that buildings and the understanding of buildings that has an ability to last through some kind of change is really the hallmark of what we want to believe are good structures, and maybe well thought through investments in capital infrastructure. We think wood lets us and tests these kinds of questions. This is the front part of that building, which includes studio-like spaces that then allows for places of meeting, and also on the side of the security, places where people could meet and do other kinds of administrative roles. But it was also the frontispiece to the space. It was also a way for us to test in real time this project, because it was going to help us with the third project, you could say, for the what we call the business hub and business innovations hub, because we wanted to understand how we could look at these purlins and girder systems that would eventually allow us to understand systems. Because one thing we did know is whatever you program a building to be on a particular day, I think many people here listening on this conversation would know that they might even change by the time you get to the day of opening. And that's just being even more tested these days, because we're seeing our ability to be fluid because we need to or because we want to, as far as spaces of coming together to work and to share, I guess, an environment where people are employed. So these images were really important for us, because it showed that we could then down the road of these other projects learn from these. We understood about fire, about how metal workers are on site to engage skills where there are going to be issues there. Even things like the management of mechanical systems was so important, because suddenly, without the drop ceilings, which people for several generations had it quote unquote relatively easy, we just want to be more thoughtful about that. We think that's a worthwhile idea, because of even the environment for the wood and what it gives back. These are just some of the models that we had for the earliest iterations of the Business Innovations Hub. Notably, it was on a sloping site. To the left would be the Ottawa River. We're looking south in this image. And this is the full idea at one point, but we learned from it. We pretty well took about half of it because of the phasing and advanced it to a point where along this view, again, we just bring up that tree, which is so important for us. That was a tree that was pretty close to where we were. And again, the reminder of trees is something that as a studio was very important to us. These are the kinds of things that are just also part of what we do. It keeps us humble. It lets us understand that this has been going on for many generations, and what does it mean locally, even for the indigeneity of the region. We're quite sensitive to that because of even the history that we have over on near Chalk River, which incidentally, the story goes that was a name given to the area of Chalk River Laboratories because it was what they would grade the lumber with when they were doing all the logging at the time. So there was a little bit of a honoring of the site in some ways, and a bit of a something that we could give back to the region. And so this context of what we are involved with as a studio translates to things also at the level of the federal agencies, people like FP Innovations or the Canadian Wood Council, which do a wonderful job. People like Marianne Berube is such a big supporter of what we've been doing and wants to see and promote that design is not left on the side, that you could innovate responsibly, but culturally too. And even Natural Resources Canada has been really good to us. Got the opportunity to be on various juries to help them select what they felt were innovative projects. We were lucky enough when we were then on the side of submitting, and we were delighted to say that we got a big level of research grants to promote and push the envelope really on the projects we're talking about today. And I think that says a lot about what we want to do in our studio at HDR, that we really look for opportunities, so much so that when we think about wood was great because it was something that we knew had to be done, and we had the perfect kind of not just the clients but the entire country in a way pushing for this. And it really kind of made you think of the narrative again, or the values that you get, and maybe the provenance. Where does it come from? How is it harvested? How do we ensure that we're part of a system that then in the procurement and use of this medium, we are not only making it great for the wellness and the feel and the resilience of a project, of a building, of a series of buildings, but we're part of an equation that in this bigger system promotes renewability, so that these carbon sinks, frankly, we want to promote the industry to grow more trees. And if you do that, we are then doing our part. So how do we then do these things, and how do we start to see a long-term investment in the choices we make with owners to say this is what you want to and ought to do? And then it made us think, wait, this is a familiar conversation, because then isn't this the story with integrated project delivery? They just had spoken about that. You know, you want to take the risk, but you got to be open. You have to be transparent. It is a safe space to think these things through. And this, to us, is a bit of a studio conversation that we think is fantastic. And it kind of first principles. Wood probably wouldn't be where it is today on this kind of project and many others if it wasn't for IPD. We want to believe IPD in its infancy as a procurement model probably needed something just like wood to say, there you go. This is how you could prove this is worth doing. And again, you saw some of these images, something we're so happy with. I love how Dave put it. You can't tell who's kind of who here because we're all relatively even at the table. And the structure of the relationships is so well crafted that we need each other to be therefore nimble and willing to kind of bring ideas up. It reminded me of certain days prior to this, where even on smaller projects where you work with the trades or the builders or the engineers or the city officials or the owners, how can you make the best choices? And we think that that's a wonderful thing, even to the point where this drawing I was able to do, I felt like the weatherman, but it was a real-time, real-sized, I guess, detail with the wood supplier, the manufacturer Nordique. We had the engineers from Integral, we had the builders from Chandos, we had a number of people, the electrical people, just to understand how to make sure with the structural engineers, how to integrate this thing. I often wondered, boy, how would we have done this in the normal process that we were so familiar with? So right then and there was an opportunity to understand that. And one of the things was, how do we look at the actual physicality and materiality of the mass timber units themselves? So we step back. One of the projects that we were focusing a little bit more on to let's say innovate even more closely, because the other projects had been going, was this Business Innovations Hub. David showed this in the suite of 4 projects. And just very simply, it's 6 stories. The 3 upper levels are more studio-like, for about 400 seats that would provide something for the campus. It's a non-nuclear type of building, but it's very much feeding the way we look at our nuclear projects and lab-related projects, which was amazing to see the relationship. The lower levels that Dave had mentioned is very much a mixed-use kind of building, the auditoriums, the resource centers, health centers, a place for people to mix and congregate. It's very much like a campus building. And this, we thought, would be good to really introduce a way to look at the building again in the context of the campus. And I think one of the things that was important for us to understand is how it provided some context for the rest of the building. Just going to advance this. Just again, thanks for the audience here. I'm trying to advance this, and it might just bump in a little quickly. I might skip a bit. Okay. This was something that was very important for us. That last sheet there, I'll just show again. It was something of what we would call the carbon pro forma, and it's a visual. And I'm going to just try to bring it up so that we don't skip it too quickly. But that one image that showed the graph, and I'm going to just do my best to click back. Thanks again for your patience. anyway, that one image was us just trying to show the significance of the carbon relationship to the rest of the campus. Here we go. I might jump a bit, but one thing we wanted to do is it's almost like a mind map that Kelly, our kind of project manager on the side of CNL, I was saying to her, this is really, we know what you have to do. On one hand, we saw their need to just physically place people of different parts of the campus into ostensibly 4 different projects. And so we understood that it kind of left 2 columns. But then how do you physically make it work together? Just really engineer it, get it built, manage the construction of it so that it's just frankly viable. The middle 2 columns, maybe just how do you translate that right to the volume, in this case with the wood. But then the request to CNL to say, well, how are we doing on the carbon sort of register? What is that? And suddenly it dawned upon us to say, well, why don't we just do this? Why don't we make this as a tool to remind ourselves that, guess what? There's several bottom lines here now. Sure, there's, as we said, bums and seats, but of course the area management, which we know about, but how do you then reconcile this and make it a fluid conversation? And maybe IBD could help us do this to see what is the kind of carbon quotient. And suddenly it made it easier because this is now a part of the real conversation of going beyond just life cycle assessments, trying to understand where funding is related to how well we are doing on the carbon side of things. And so it made a lot of sense for us to picture this, but to develop the roadmap. We believe this is part of the crafting of what we would do to try to ensure a future for these kinds of projects. And so that then gave us a little bit more incentive to then say we got ourselves a project. You've seen images like this that would then give us this building that then is tied to a couple others, and there's one of them, the ANMRC in the background. Foreground is the business hub, and then to say, could this be a demonstration of a building that's really in and of itself a chassis that we're making that then lets other projects learn from it. And then if we're intelligent, hopefully, about the way it's enveloped, the way it sort of is erected, then could this be something that then promotes wood in a way that's not just a feel-good material? We understand its wellness opportunities, but one of these things here, I love how Dave reminded ourselves that whether we have people like the office furniture folks that we were talking to understand the best sort of dimensions for bays, but then the limitations or opportunities for the girder and purlin depths that then told us how grid lines should be, right down to the people we were talking to for the cladding. So we did this not in a cascading way of who's first, who presumably is more important to make these decisions. We did this together. And then we were able to look at the optimization of the material and therefore the potential use. And then with that, we will look even further to understand the actual structure of the wood, because maybe we could just have a medium in which we could, because we learned it, understood the actual grain structure. One of the things that we learned because of all this is when they said that the upper tips that were usually wasted away, the upper third of the black spruce, was the best, most tight-grained, I guess, the tight-grained structure, which was the filet mignon, they would call it. So that's why they made a lamella. That's why we learned that you could mill through it confidently, at which point we said, what if we then use the actual structure of the wood to help us integrate different sort of opportunities for raceways or chases that then would allow free movement. It's got another variation on the term free plan, where we could then see whenever one wants to, with whatever change, they could tap into and then re-inhabit those spaces for different lines and services. Something we felt was really good. And it really then brought us to the point where whether you could zoom in tightly, because we gave ourselves a culture to learn this together in an IPD format, in a studio format, we were able to step back and say, maybe we could typologically have projects that could then be resilient. And in that sense, we felt this is the intelligent way to go forward. And one thing we love saying is this whole methodology, a cultural one really, is a way to, in this case, prove wood's worth. And in doing so, we're probably also proving the project's process as well. Something we think we could give back to the industry, something we know we're blazing trails, no pun intended with that, because yes, there's trees that are being harvested, but we want to believe that for every project we can do here, certainly it'll help CNL. We'd like to think it really gives us promise for our own studio, but why would we want to share that way of learning? Because together we do feel we could make that kind of impact. And I think that's something that we want to learn from, that if we do this right, we all get a better chance of doing something that gives back. And maybe that's a lesson for us to really start to see the opportunities for these kinds of prototypes, if you will. And in this sense, we think this is a wonderful opportunity to share ideas for tomorrow, but designing it and making it too. Thank you. I just want to maybe invite Dave back to the conversation. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to share these kinds of notes, field notes really, and we feel lucky in our profession to take part in this. And Dave, I don't know if there's any thoughts you had, and we could turn it back to the organizers if there's any questions.
Thanks, Don. I mean, maybe in closing, I'll just say, obviously, you've heard us kind of speak rather passionately about kind of some key aspects of this project. Obviously, there's a range of topics here. Hopefully this has been a good introduction, but we're happy to take questions. Kevin, maybe I'll pass it back to you to support us there if there are any.
Sure thing.
So thank you all. Thanks.
Gentlemen, excellent presentation. That was really good. There are a few questions, and we'll get through the ones that are typed up. If anyone else has any questions right now, feel free to put them in the question box. And as you can see, Don and Dave have their emails there as well. Feel free to contact them if you have any questions after the fact. So the first question we have is from Dan Curley, and it has to do with the IPD process. The question is, you mentioned that this was the largest IPD in Canada. What is the rough total contract value?
Yeah, so I'll take that one there. So what CNL did here, or what we have here, is actually 2 contracts. So there are 4 buildings, and the first 3, or I would say the 3 smaller buildings, were bundled into 1 contract, and that was sort of in the $150 million range. And then the main nuclear lab is north of 300 million, and that was a separate contract. So we did have trades that were similar on both projects. We were on the team on both sides. We did have other consultants and other experts on the lab side, as you would expect. So slightly different teams on both sides, but effectively we had those 2 contracts. I think that was also something that was interesting, where when we worked on the first 3 projects, we could see really about we designed and delivered them as a suite of buildings. So whether it be similar architectural detailing or mechanical approach, it was also how we addressed the financial aspects of it. So if we saw that it made sense to shift money from one project to another, or if we found efficiencies from one to another, it would benefit all 3 projects together.
Great. Next question, it's actually a 3-part question from Sam Bose. The questions are, which party covered overall liability for GD52 implementation? Was there separate insurance coverage for this project for design liability? And finally, was there a cap to the paying share for each team member?
Okay, so those are very specific questions. Maybe Donna, I don't know if you want to handle any of those. I'll do my best to begin. In terms of the liability and the insurance, obviously we did not have anything above our traditional insurance on this. Obviously, the specifics, and I'm not 100% sure about the specific references that you've been making, but I would say that there were no additional specific liabilities beyond a traditional project, where that the constructor would carry their liability. Each of the poly-party members would carry their own liability insurance as well. The second part of the question I'll talk about the third part because I was trying to address the first two. The second, the third question regarding the cap of paying gain. I mean, that gets into the details of IPD, but what I will say is that each of the team members who were invited to come in, submit their qualifications, were also asked to submit their rates and submit their expected profit margin. So those were all part of the consideration of whether someone became part of the team. Now, you can imagine a designer's portion of the total profit is quite a bit less than, say, the contractor, because the contractor is responsible for more of the overall project's dollars, but the proportion stayed the same. So if the project was needed to dip into the profit pool to cover some issues, everyone's proportion dropped. And if the project was financially even did better than we expected and there was a little bit more money on the table, that additional money was also gained proportionally. So if that makes sense, there was no specific cap. I will say that, well, depending on each contract, there can be a moment where there's some things like if we manage to save more than 20% of the total project's value, that any money above that amount would go back to the owner. So though maybe that would be considered a cap, but typically projects that could be that far below the target cost usually meant that there was something wrong in the initial analysis of the costing. Hopefully
One
that
thing
answers the question. Yeah.
One thing I might add to that, it's Don here. I think related to that question, maybe to a degree, is more the behavioral kind of ways of working in just even the terminology, where we'd have something called a risk register, which for many people is that the contingency dollars often just put into budgets for a little bit of give, if you will. And I think one of the things that we would constantly do is understand the balance of those savings that could maybe work towards being favorable, for all the poly party members, but also to ensure that we're ready for things that we recognize might come up, or that would be allowances for. Is it innovations, or is it kind of sort of nimble moments of change? We think that alone, that setup, was something so positive, and it was easy to gauge what we were trying to give back to the project, but also ensure that people's just, let's say, businesses were healthy in this endeavor.
All right.
So there was something there that was quite open, and the culture. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, you might have cut out there just briefly, but I think we definitely got a good comprehensive answer. There's two more questions kind of bundled together. The questions are, what is the major occupancy classification? And the related question is the percentage of F classification of the building, or what is the percentage of F classification of the building?
Don, do you want to take a crack at that? I mean, I would say obviously all of the buildings are different. I'm assuming you're asking about the nuclear research lab. That is a primary F occupancy for that building. There are portions of that which are subsidiary to the F classification, but it would be essentially the entire amount. I'm not sure if that question is related to the use of mass timber, and if it is, I will say that the research lab, roughly about 10% of that building, of the floor area, 12,000 square feet of the 120,000 square feet of that building is in mass timber. There's a portion of laboratory which is in mass timber. I will say that those labs did require vibration isolation, and they did sit on a concrete slab. The wood is not exposed in those labs, even though it was used to construct, and it had gypsum board fireproofing around those in that section of the building. We believed obviously exposing the mass timber was kind of a goal, but not a requirement. It was used, we wanted to use wood in as much of the building as possible for obviously the kind of carbon benefits. Beauty obviously was also kind of a key benefit, but we thought it was absolutely fine in some areas to have that wood covered up.
Okay, yeah, he just clarified, or the question was from Som. Yes, the question was related to mass timber and meant for the laboratory building. So I believe you have covered that. At this time, there are no further questions. We will close this out right away unless there's anything else. Don or Dave, do you have any final comments?
Just very happy to have participated in this for myself. So happy to address any other questions. Obviously, there is a large team. The two of us are representing kind of one perspective on it. So happy to, if we haven't sufficiently answered any of the questions, kind of pass those forward. We can forward those along to others who may give a more full answer as well. So Don, to you as well.
Yeah, I'll echo that, and I think really it's a bit of a something celebratory almost in our tone here, because I think it's a wonderful moment to be part of a project that, yes, we get to work on and develop, but also to understand that the country and the region really, really believes in this. And we get to do this because so many people have worked so hard to ensure that that this is something of a priority, and it's really fantastic.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. As mentioned to everyone, this video or the recording for this presentation will be on YouTube. And everyone stay safe, and we look forward to you joining us on our next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.